You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and the person who is praising me is Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hallelujah.
Actually, I guess technically you weren't praising me.
I live a praise-filled life.
I try to get you to say something nice about me on the mic, but you don't.
It's just too hard.
It's too hard to say something nice about me, or it's too hard to catch you?
Yes.
Yes. So how have you been?
Good. I'm always good.
You had, people don't know this, there'd be no reason for them to know this. You had alerted me that you were leaving early today. We haven't talked about it, and I haven't asked anything until now, so I don't know if that's something you can share.
I have an important engagement with somebody I like better.
Okay. All right. That's fine. My wife was asking before you came. Because I told her that I was free for lunch, and she's like, too bad.
She had other plans
She's
already.
got other plans.
She's had them for months.
Yeah, she's going out with somebody that she likes better, too.
Yeah. Well, that happens to you a lot, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. So we are back in, I hope, back into the swing of things.
Our technical deficiencies have been remedied.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man.
We're going to have to fire that guy.
I know it. We need a new producer. And I'm still talking about it, so obviously it's something that I haven't completely worked through, but I still feel inept.
Inadequate,
yeah.
inept, inane.
All of those things. And we've done shows on imposter syndrome, so if people want to go back and search for that, that would be something that I think would be beneficial for people if they can relate to this idea of feeling inept and inadequate.
Well, if they're looking for the imposter system, they can always find it on Psych with Mike.
Yes.
Not on Psych with Brett.
Is there such a thing as Psych with Mike or Psych with Brett?
No.
Yeah, so don't search that because that will give you no results.
Exactly. Frustration.
One of the things that I remember from graduate school, and I'll say fondly, some of it was fond, some of it wasn't, was this idea of systems theory.
Systems theory is an interesting way to approach trying to have some understanding. It's a lot like social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
Social sciences, you look at something from the perspective of one of the social sciences, like historically. If you look at people, families, for instance, historically, we evolved from family, clan, tribe, region, nation. And the hierarchy of commitment to each of those is incremental.
Mm-hmm.
But the basic is family, clan, tribe. If you look at it from a sociological perspective, which is a different social science, then you try to figure out what are the patterns that people follow in groups. What are the rituals? What are the standards? What are the expectations? What are the waves of movement and emotional control that go through the group? And if you look at it from a psychological perspective, then I want to know is what triggers you as an individual to behave the way that you're behaving. So a social scientist, and a therapist is a type of social scientist, should incorporate data from all of those disparate groups. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about family systems, we want to know something about the family's history, the membership, the patterns, the religion, the rituals, the power groupings. And then when you come into the office as a client, if you come in as an individual, we'll ask you about all those other things, but we only get your perspective.
Yeah.
If we are able to have other members of the family grouping to come in, then we get the perspective from each of them, plus the added benefit of being able to observe the nonverbals of all of them as they interact. And so then as a therapist, what you're always looking for are patterns, not who's right and who's wrong, but how do they dance the dance? And what do the steps or the moves of the dance mean to the dancers? Because if I come to understand what it means to you as one of the dancers, then I can do my job as a therapist, which is to create that safe holding environment and reflect back to you accurately how I'm experiencing you, how I'm understanding you, so that you have an opportunity to go, no, you're crazy as hell. I don't do that. I don't do that at all. I remember one time I had a family that was sitting in my office for several weeks, arguing and despairing over what seemed to be breaking their family apart. And there were 4 members of the family.
Was it you? Were you breaking them apart?
Only in terms of the seating arrangement.
Yeah.
But they were in denial about the pattern of the dance steps, who was leading and who was following. And when I observed it enough that I felt like I could accurately reflect it back to them, I said, this is what I see. And they were like, no, man, you don't see crap. That's not going on. I said, okay. Because you never argue with them. You never say, I'm right, you're wrong. You say, okay, I don't know enough to understand yet. Can I keep checking as I get a perception or I get an understanding, what I think is an understanding? Can I ask you, hey, I think this just happened. Did anybody else see it? And they'll go, well, yeah, you can ask that. And then they'll go, no, that didn't just happen. And they all agree, no, you don't know anything. Why are we paying you? But eventually, if I'm right, then one of them will go, well, yeah, maybe, or yeah, I see that. And then you get a crack in the ice, and then it begins to open, and you can invite them to look at that so they have an opportunity to change the dance music.
And the reason that I ask, was it you, is because triangulation is a word in systems theory, and what that means is obviously creating a triangle. So 2 parents.
So I'm way too square to be triangulated.
Against a child, or the system against the therapist. So the system always looks for some kind of safety valve, some mechanism to allow the system to return to homeostasis. So when we talk about systems theory, what we are talking about is moving a system out of homeostasis or balance and towards better health. But everybody, and I tell clients this all the time, human beings would much prefer the pain of the known over the fear of the unknown.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it's scary to move the system out of homeostasis, but that's the only way for change to happen. But what will oftentimes occur is that the system of triangulation, the system will decide, oh, the therapist is the bad guy because the therapist is moving us out of balance, is disrupting our homeostasis. So somehow we've got to gang up on the therapist to get him in line so the system can return to its homeostatic function.
Us against them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember being in graduate school and being introduced to systems theory in the first class that you take, which may have different names depending on where you go to school, but at Webster, where I went to school, where you went to school, where we both eventually helped run that graduate program, it was called Foundations of Counseling. And when this was first introduced, the idea of systems theory was first introduced, it's like, okay, duh, this is so intuitive. Why do we have to say it? Why do we have to say the family as a system? Why do we have to say the family as a system interacts with a larger system, which is a community and a nation and a world? Why do we have to say that? That just makes sense. But the truth is that the idea, the concept of systems theory, really, when I was in graduate school in the 80s and 90s, and then even before that, undergraduate in the mid to late 80s, the idea of system was not that new, was very novel, hadn't been around that long, because this guy named Ludwig von Belanfy, you don't like it when I get all in the technical weeds.
I'm sorry, I fell asleep. What did you say?
So there's this guy.
Yeah.
And
there's always a guy.
Yeah, there's always a guy in the early 1900s that started talking about systems. And his idea was that he was going to develop this concept of systems that could be applied to all scientific endeavors. And he proposed the concept of systems theory, and this really didn't start to catch on until the 1950s. So everything that we think about as ecosystems or biomes, all this kind of stuff, really didn't start to become a part of the public consciousness until the 60s and 70s. Before that, people didn't really think in terms of a system. So, nowadays we think, oh, if you eliminate bees, which are an insect, that's going to have a cascading effect because bees pollinate plants. Now those plants are going to become scarce or die. Then those plants feed other animals that feed other animals. So everything's an interconnected web. We didn't think like that. We thought, oh, we can kill all the whales. Who cares if we kill all the whales? That's not going to hurt anything. But it does hurt something because whenever the system is taken out of balance, then something's going to happen. There's going to be a consequence. And families are the same way.
Yeah, the aliens are going to come back on Star Trek and
Star
save
Trek.
the whales.
They are going to, yeah.
But they're heavy to get by the water.
They just wanted to talk to the whales. They didn't, yeah. The Enterprise crew went back in time and saved the whales.
Right.
Yay. Yay, Star Trek. But the point being that even though this idea feels very intuitive, how could we not think of things as a system? We've only been thinking of systems for the last less than 70 years.
Yeah, in the late 60s, sociologists were coming up with what they call game theory, strategies for how to understand the actions of countries and people and families, that everybody has an assigned role. These roles are complementary, necessary, and automatic. And you learn your place in the game. You're a marker on the board, and life is about strategy. And you got to figure out how to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to, jump your checkers all the way across and have one of them turn into a king or something.
Mm-hmm.
So they were beginning to create a scientific methodology for explaining game theory at about the same time that you're talking about. And it's fairly useful. I mean, teachers were starting to develop all these games for economics, for history, for war, for politics, that they could use as teaching lessons and have people take roles in the games and have a little election or something and see what kind of trends evolved and how do they compare to what we can discover about the real world.
And because we are in a system, because we seek homeostasis, each person in the system then plays a role. So this is the idea of where each individual has a role. Virginia Satir talked a lot about this kind of idea of family roles and the expectations on families for the way that they interact and the function that they serve within the system.
So let's talk about a couple of examples, because you can get this as a therapist. Somebody's going to come in with a family. You're going to try to categorize the family. Mm-hmm. What am I looking at here? Is this an alcoholic family? What do I know about the patterns that I can expect to find in an alcoholic family? Is this a religious family? What do I know about the patterns that are likely to, or what do I need to know about the patterns that I can expect to have happen in terms of power, in terms of status, in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of personal choice, what passes for the idea of personal choice. As a family, do we expect, you get girls from well-to-do, high-power families are more likely to have eating disorders, particular kind of eating disorders, anorexia. What do you know about that? What do you know about the pattern of these kind of families with the hypercritical, high-achieving dad who puts expectations on the daughter to be perfect? I had so many swimmers and gymnasts who were female who had eating issues and were perfectionistic in terms of making straight A's, working in crazy hours. I mean, they'd get up at like 3:30 in the morning and go swim 20 miles, then get dressed and come to school, make straight A's in school, never miss anything, get all their assignments in on, unlike you, they get all their assignments in on time. And they make an A, and then they go swim after school and prepare to swim in the weekend meet. And they swim 50, 100 miles a week. To me, it's a crazy life, and it puts so much pressure on these girls. And the families tend to say, well, no, they put it on themselves. So does the family need someone who acts out that role, who fills the dynamics of that role, so that the rest of the family stays in balance? Because what we teach in therapy school is if you change one of the roles, if you change the actor for the role, you take one son, who's the hero son, and you make him the scapegoat, then the other son will step up and be the hero, or the daughter will step up and be the hero as far as she can.
Okay, let's take our break and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
All right. One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
That's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. And so, there are two things about what you were talking about that I would respond to. The first one is, in the family where you were talking about one of the daughters being, such a high-functioning athlete, and that she puts the pressure on herself, the question would be to the family, well, what happens if she decides to quit? Who's going to... is the family going to embrace that, or are they going to put pressure on her to get back into either the swimming or some other function?
And that pressure can be overt or
covert.
And the covert one is the more deadly one, because nobody has to take ownership of their agenda, because they can say, well, I didn't say that.
And I would argue that it's probably 99% covert.
Yes.
That it's nonverbal even in some ways.
Which is why, as a therapist, you specialize in learning to read nonverbals and to look for the patterns in the dance. So when they're all in your office and you can focus on not the background story, because there's always a background. It's like music in the background or music on an escalator or an elevator. But you focus on the patterns of interaction, of cueing, of triggering, of responding that you can see, and you ask about it in the here and now moment. We talk about doing therapy in the here and now. All you have is what's in the room with you at the time and the family myth. So they'll all recite the family myth, but you can't help them with that unless you can start to bring into that discussion of the family myth the behaviors that you see in the room and the feelings that you observe, experience in the room, and gently invite them to consider, hey, is it possible there's something going on here? And this is what I think I see. And they initially will always say, oh, no, you're crazy. That's not going on. That's never going on. And someone will get really angry and somebody will act out. If we get too close to mom, there's another analog in therapy called top dog, underdog. It's a Gestalt therapy concept. And somebody presents as the top dog. I'm the power figure. What I say goes. When I speak, I've spoken and the family will comply. But the real power is usually with the underdog, the person that presents as the underdog, like mom. Dad comes in and says, we live in a patriarchal society, and I'm the one with the gonads, and I'll decide all these things. And the rest of you just say amen. My dad used to say to me, boy, when I say jump, you say how high on the way up. Crazy stuff like that. But the real power to manipulate the system lies with the mom very often. That's what you have to observe. And then that's what you have to begin to suggest. And it's a real challenging, stimulating opportunity to get a group of people in the room who are in denial about what's going on, who believe the script and articulate it.
But whether you're talking to a family and you have a whole system there, or you're talking to an individual, one of the things that I always tell clients, one of the things that I would really encourage therapists who are working today to understand is that if you make a change, there's going to be resistance to that change. And you have to be willing to withstand that resistance until the change becomes habituated or becomes something that feels natural, because there's going to be all kinds of pressure put on you to snap back into expected patterns of behavior.
External and internal. The internal pressure is going to be the guilt script that you've learned and internalized through the development of your years. And so as a young child, you learn you are not important. Daddy is important. And so when daddy needs to sleep, you have to be quiet. And if you're making noise, you're being a bad kid and we're going to punish you. You can't disturb daddy's cycle. So then as you get older, the lesson that you've internalized, never challenge daddy, because daddy's the guy. And so if you see the world differently than daddy appears to see the world, you're wrong. And so if you try to behave differently, if you like somebody that daddy doesn't like, say you marry a Republican, or you marry a Jew, or you marry a gay person, then you're wrong. You're broken. You're destroying the family. You can't function. This is all on you. You're bad. So if you come to therapy for that, part of the challenge of the therapist is to invite you first to learn the operational cycle of that script, and then second, to empower you to have the option to say, there are other scripts out there. Maybe I can find a different one, or maybe I can write one that's more satisfying to me. But that's really frightening.
And you have to, if you're going to do that, you have to withstand that
pressure
from everybody else who are going to deny putting pressure on you. Nobody's going to say, oh yeah, I want you to go back to the expected pattern of behavior. Everybody's going to say, oh yeah, you be you, but unconsciously.
We're going to bring Father Will in for dinner, our family priest, and he's going to have dinner with us. And he's not going to scold you or challenge you or say anything direct to you, but he's just going to be here and ooze the right messages for you to come face to face with what a screw up you are.
And when we go back to the idea of roles, because that's so central to the concept of systems theory, I think we should expand on that a little bit. So what we're talking about are roles like family hero, family mediator,
rescuer,
scapegoat, and
comedian.
And so all of these roles play some kind of anxiety reducing function within the family that allows it to remain in homeostasis. And the question is, if you are going to try and move towards change, you're going to be breaking the expected patterns of your role.
And in a small family, you may have multiple roles.
I
was alternatively the scapegoat, the comedian, and the hero. And so depending on any given set of circumstances, I mean, one of the things I learned to do is be the family comedian. I was rewarded for being quick with a verbal response that would make people laugh. And I found that I could use that to avoid discomfort, to avoid pain and distress. And it was a successful strategy, not only within the family, but outside of the family. I became the class clown in school. I'd make everybody laugh all the time. When things would start to go awry, I could make a joke and people would laugh, even the teachers. And I was popular and a necessary ingredient in that classroom. Same thing would happen at home. I would do it at work. I've even had people say, are you never serious about anything? Grandma Joe just died, and you're making jokes. And we're standing at the grave, and people are crying, and there's raw emotions everywhere, and you're making a joke. That's my role. That's what I'm supposed to do.
And so as a therapist, what our job is to try
learn how to get me to shut up and not tell a joke.
No. Well, is to try and get the individual to try on a different role and be able to sit with the discomfort of the anxiety of that. So there's a really famous scene in a book by Carl Whitaker called Family Crucible. And in this book, he actually gets into a fight, a physical fight, with one of the children in this family that he's working with, which obviously you couldn't do today. I mean, but it's amazing that back in the day, he got in, not only did he get into this altercation with a client, but then he printed it and published it, and people, didn't bat an eye about it. Obviously, that isn't what we're suggesting. But the reason why Whitaker did that was because this child was creating turmoil and chaos within this family system, and no one would stand up to him. And obviously that is for reasons that were unique to this particular system, but Whitaker was trying to demonstrate that you can engage this person in different ways, and that could help to contain the chaos of his presentation. And that's really, so we're not recommending people get into physical fights with their clients, but what we're saying is you have to help the client or the system to be able to try on new roles and be able to sit with and tolerate
within the
anxiety.
safe environment of the therapy room. While you're here this hour, can you imagine, and can I get you to just try on this new shirt? Can you just sit here with these feelings and feel them and not distract yourself from them with anger or acting out or jokes or whatever? Can you just wear it for a little while? And we'll put it back together before you leave. And that's one of the skills that therapists have to learn. As a therapist, you got to, whatever you do, 50-minute hour or 60-minute hour of therapy with these clients. And it's a strategy for a lot of clients to wait until close to the end of the session and then have some deep, painful revelation. You have to anticipate that, and you have to find a way to put them back together so that they can leave on time at the end of the hour. And you have to get them out of there on time because you got somebody else sitting in the waiting room that's paying for the next hour. They don't want that infringement. So you got to manage all of that, and you have to learn the skills for doing that. And so I get you in my office. I try to get you in touch with these feelings that are outside of your normal comfort role definition and have you experience them. But then I have to take that all back before the end of the hour and put you back in your normal role and let you go. And that's a real skill set challenge for therapists to learn.
And what I would recommend anybody who is doing systems-based theory or therapy to understand is that the individual with the greatest psychological flexibility is the person who has the greatest ability to change, right? And so you have to evaluate who is the person here that has the greatest potential for psychological flexibility, and it may not be a parent, it may be a child, it may even be a young child. And I'm not saying that we should have 5-year-olds trying to set the dynamic in their family, but what I'm saying is that you have to identify the person who comes in with the greatest psychological flexibility, the greatest potential for that, and then try and help them to try on a new
but
role.
As a therapist, you have an ethical agenda. You have to remember, who is your client? Is your client an individual in the family, or is your client the family? Is your client the acting out child that has been referred to you by the school system or the court system or the family, saying, Billy's a impossible adolescent, and if we don't change these behaviors, he's going to end up dead or in jail. So can you fix him? So you have to figure out who is your client. And when you're dealing with multiple parties, then there are layers of distinction that have to be made about information shared. For instance, if I'm working with a 14-year-old, you're the father, you're paying the bill, you have the legal right to the information. I have to have some understanding that if your 14-year-old tells me something that he doesn't want you to know, I have to be able to use my judgment on whether or not to share that with you. I mean, there are some things that the law exempts. Like if he says, I'm suicidal, I have to tell you, hey, Billy's suicidal. But if he tells me I might be gay, then I don't have to tell you that. As a matter of fact, I have to not tell you that. I have to encourage Billy to get strong enough at some point to say, hey, Dad, I'm thinking this. I want to explore what this might mean, and I want you to know what I'm dealing with. Well, that's going to blow the lid off the whole family, potentially. But if you've done your work with the family as a group, you may be able to get them there safely.
Mm-hmm. And so then the point of that would be to try and allow the family, or to hold hands with the family while they sit with the anxiety,
the surges of feelings, guilt, anxiety, remorse, sadness, loss, grief. There's so many layers to that particular conversation, and that's just one potential conversation.
And that's assuming that you have access to the system, which in most situations you don't. You have access to an individual, but the same concepts apply. You have to be thinking that way as a therapist, that this individual lives within a system and actually lives within several systems, and change in their behavior could have potential consequences in all of those systems.
So as a therapist, I often found it helpful to think along the lines of watching a movie with a soundtrack, because we all have soundtracks that play in our lives. I got conversations going on in my head all the time, even if I'm quiet. If I'm driving quietly in the car without the radio on, there's still soundtracks going on around me. And sometimes people fantasize soundtracks, and they identify with particular movie soundtracks. But the analogy that I want to make is that song has meaning, it has words, it has roles that are defined that the person has internalized. And so if you come to one of those people and say, what if we put a different record on? You listen to a different soundtrack. How would that play out? Could we try that? Always with the proviso that before you leave, we'll put the real record back on. So,
and just as a parting kind of thought, that's actually a Genesis song, another record. And so if you've never heard that song, I would encourage everybody.
Genesis with Phil Collins, with Phil Collins, deaf drummer.
It would be to go and listen to that song, because it actually...
You should really date yourself with how old you are in the group.
Well, perhaps, but it's an actual... The song is about exactly what we're talking about. And so for anybody who would be curious about that, I would encourage them to look that up on the internet. So hopefully that is beneficial for people. As always, if you have any questions, you can get a hold of us at psychwithmike.com. If you have questions about anything that we've discussed, or you have a topic that you would like us to cover, you can get a hold of us there. The music that is performed in Psych with Mike is written and executed by Mr. Ben DeClue, and we thank him for that. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.